Well, guys, Canelo Alvarez dismantled mandatory challenger Avni Yildirim last night, and he's got a mega fight with Billy Joe Saunders set up. We're talking about last night's performance right now. What's up, Barnhill family? Welcome back to the channel.
Yo.
So, Nick, we got another boxing video. And for you guys that are just now tuning in, we do mostly MMA stuff on this channel. But, you know, there's a few boxers that I think absolutely deserve videos. And Canelo is certainly one of them. And definitely a boxer that both of us are a fan of and that we follow.
Yeah, we sprinkle him in most of the time when we do boxing videos because he's kind of the P for P best boxer in the game. And he's always staying active and staying fresh in our minds.
Yeah, he's saying he wants to fight 4 times in 2021. Yeah. He had the layoff, obviously, with the coronavirus, the dispute with Golden Boy and DAZN, and that seems to all be past him now. And he's looking to, at 30 years old, solidify himself as not only the best Mexican boxer of this generation, but potentially the best Mexican boxer of all time.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I really like is that Canelo took his career into his own hands, and he's kind of separated himself from all the people and all of the strings that were attached to his career that were maybe holding him back in some regards. He's a competitor when it comes down to it, and he wants to compete against the very best, and he wants to test himself, most importantly, and I think he's absolutely most free right now to do just that, and at this point, nobody's going to beat him. He's going to have to move to heavyweight to compete, to have somebody that I think maybe I'll bet against him on.
Yeah, you know, he certainly learned a lot from Floyd Money Mayweather, taking his only loss and then taking his advice and taking his career into his own hands as he progressed in his own career. There's really not much to talk about as far as last night's fight goes. No. If you wanted to watch what happened last night, you could essentially watch Canelo hit a heavy bag for 3 rounds, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
Yildirim was completely outclassed. How in the world somebody who hasn't won a fight since 2018 can become a mandatory challenger in an organizing body is beyond me. It's beyond comprehension. And I think it says everything that you need to know about some of these organizing bodies that boxing has right now.
Yeah, the baffling world of boxing never ceases to amaze us, just at how ridiculous some of their rules and their what's the word I'm looking for? The traditions,
MOs,
the traditions that they hold on to for dear life. They're like, oh no, we have to do it this way, and we have to have all of these alphabets that have their own belts, and they're all half of them look cheesy. Half of them don't even look like they cost $100. I could go down to the mall and buy a belt that costs more money than half of them, but some people are into it, I guess, and if the more belts you collect, the cooler you are, then consider Canelo Miles Davis.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think it does a disservice to the sport, and I don't mean to make this a pile-on to boxing, but there's certain things that I think even the most diehard boxing fans can admit that they should adapt from some of these mixed martial arts promotions like the UFC. When you have a fight, a title fight in the UFC, tell me when the last time you saw somebody in a world championship fight as the minus 3,000 favorite. And then on top of that, you get a bunch of people in the commentating positions that are talking about this fight's only going to go as long as Canelo lets it. It's only going to go as long as Canelo carries it. I'm sorry, as a fan, as a new fan, if you want to expand your brand and expand your business, you have to do more than tell me that there's a 0% chance that the guy who's the mandatory challenger has been brought in to fight a guy. If he keeps his hands to his face, it might go 6 rounds. If he starts throwing punches, it's probably going to go 2. You can't excite me that way.
No, and I'm sure the numbers reflect just that. Nobody cares if Canelo can beat up some guy that hasn't won a fight since 2018. Of course he can. He's what we want to see, and the reason Canelo's biggest fights are against his toughest opponents is because that's true competition. When you just throw some guy in there because he somehow has a belt that that Canelo has to work for, or he gets punished by this sanctioning body
because the mandatory deserves their shot, or they're going to strip you, or
right. It's nonsense, and then it creates a form of red tape around something else, and then he can't compete for these. And they've created this thing where if he wants to be the greatest of all time, he has to collect all the belts and become the unified, undisputed, all this stuff. It's nonsense to me. And there are a lot of things that the MMA world has taken from boxing and learned from and adopted and carried through, and that's a sign of respect. But also you can learn. It's just like a new student in jiu-jitsu. If you're first day in there, you're going to be learning from black belts. But guess what? By the time you're a black belt, there are certain things every now and again that maybe a blue belt or a purple belt teach you. And while MMA isn't nearly as old of a sport as far as the modern era as boxing, it can teach boxing a lot of things. And it's adopted a lot of what boxing did. And it credits boxing to a lot of the things that we do in MMA and that are staples.
The 10-point must round system, the 1 minute in between rounds.
The athletic commissions, we use the same ones.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things where boxing is just so stubborn. They don't want to switch anything up. And it's going to hurt the sport as a whole. And it's continuing to do just that.
Watching last night, I was thinking to myself, how in the world does anybody, any sanctioning body, any belt organization, any promoter think that this is an acceptable fight to package up and sell to fans in the form of a subscription service? And when you think about it, and this is, I don't want to make this sound like it's Canelo's fault. It's not.
It's not.
Canelo is the most game fighter in the game, in my opinion. Yeah. He wants to take on Billy Joe. He wants to step up to light heavyweight and fight Kovalev, people like that. Mm-hmm. He is absolutely on a tear. His power's only getting better. He's the best boxer in the world right now.
Right.
But he has to adhere to the rules of the game in which he plays, which is boxing, and that means he's got to take on a mandatory challenger every so often that has no business sparring with even going and being a training partner for Canelo for a fight, let alone being in the room or in the ring with him on fight night.
Yeah, and I don't want it to sound like we're criticizing the fighters, because nine times out of 10, it's not the fighters that are in their own way. It's the promoters. It's the people that run their careers, their managers that know they can squeeze as much money out of easy fights as possible. And it's just wrong. You wouldn't see a fighter in the UFC fighting for a title against an unranked opponent or an unworthy opponent. Every time a UFC champion or a Bellator champion, for that matter, any of the major organizations, anytime they step in there to defend their belt, they are likely fighting the next best person in the organization or on the planet. And that's just not the case in boxing. You see, there's 1 out of every 5. So 20% of Canelo's boxing matches are against the best of the best. And it's not him that's wanting that. He wants to compete. He's a true competitor. He's a real sportsman. He wants to fight the best of the best. And they're taking countless times and months and years and training camps and damage off of him and on his body, giving him these silly fights.
It slows things down. It slows the sport down. And by the way, you have to pay Canelo tens of millions of dollars to show up, make weight, put his mouthpiece in, and get in the ring and fight.
Right.
So you might as well make it worth your while.
Yeah, and I would have to say that 9 out of 10 boxing fans didn't know who his opponent was last night.
And it's literally the same thing, Nick, as if you were to take John Jones as the light heavyweight champion, because I think you can compare John to Canelo. They're both arguably the best at what they do in their respective sports right now. And you were to say, you know what? Forget about the top 10 in the UFC or forget about the next guy up who would be a much closer matchup for Jones. There's this guy from a country called Turkey that's in Europe that's the champion of their local promotion that he hasn't won a fight in a few years, but he's a tough competitor, and we're gonna put him up against John Jones. The commission wouldn't allow it, so why they allow it in boxing, because as you said, it's the same commission, is beyond me. And the odds would be ridiculous, and the fans would revolt against it. Yeah. And me as a boxing fan, and I know this video sounds a bit on the negative side, and I don't intend for it to sound as such, but I have to just tell the truth how I see it. Yeah. For me as a boxing fan, we just need to stop accepting these fights as the norm. Like, it doesn't have to be the norm. It can change.
Yeah, and they get in the way of the great fights. Imagine, we have Israel Adesanya versus Jan Blachowicz coming up this weekend. And imagine if they were putting red tape around and preventing this fight from happening, champ status from happening, because Israel had to defend a mandatory fight against, you name some guy that runs,
Joe Schmo out of Australia, who's the top champion in that promotion.
Yeah, who wouldn't even be in the top 20 in the UFC, and he's going to get mopped up against Israel Adesanya. But Israel's got to take 3 months to train for him and fight and get into a battle, cut weight and all this stuff, and then wait for another opportunity just to move up and fight the fights that we want to see, the fights that the casuals of the MMA world actually will get behind. And it's a really bad mark on the sport of boxing.
I agree. Guys, let us know in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree with our assessment? I think boxing would be much, much better served if we put the best in there with the best all the time. Forget about this nonsense. Everybody trying to keep a 30-0 record, 40-0 record. Let's just put the best with the best. Let everything shake out, and I think it'd do the sport a lot, and it would help to move boxing forward as a whole. Please let us know in the comments if you agree or if you disagree and what you thought of Canelo's great performance last night. And as always, guys, if you enjoyed the show, please like, comment, and subscribe, and check us out on audio where you listen to podcasts. Have a good day.
Holding on to that O, by the way, is one of the most ridiculous things. If you're 50-0, 30-0, 40-0, you're not in a real competitive sport. So we'll leave you with that. Peace.
Have a good one.